The construction site buzzed with the usual sounds of hammers and drills under the scorching afternoon sun. Marco wiped sweat from his forehead, his calloused hands gripping a shovel as he cleared debris from the foundation. He'd been working since dawn, and his back ached with every movement. But he couldn't afford to slow down. His daughter's medical bills wouldn't pay themselves, and this job was all he had. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the site, kicking up dust as it came to an abrupt stop. Out stepped Richard Castellano, a real estate developer worth millions, wearing a suit that cost more than Marco made in 6 months. His face was already red with anger as he marched toward the foreman, barking complaints about the construction timeline. The workers kept their heads down, knowing better than to engage with men like him. Marco didn't see Castellano approaching. He was focused on his work, shoveling concrete chunks into a wheelbarrow. When he accidentally bumped the wheelbarrow, it rolled backward a few feet, splashing muddy water onto Castellano's pristine Italian leather shoes. Time seemed to freeze. Marco's eyes went wide as he realized what had happened. Before he could apologize, Castellano's hand flew across his face with a sharp crack that echoed across the construction site. The slap sent Marco stumbling backward, his cheek burning with humiliation more than pain. Blood trickled from his split lip as he fell to his knees, dirt covering his worn jeans. The other workers stopped what they were doing, their faces a mixture of shock and helpless sympathy. Castellano stood over him, his finger pointing down like a weapon. "You worthless piece of trash. Do you have any idea how much these shoes cost? More than you'll make in a year." His voice dripped with contempt as Marco remained on the ground, his pride shattered. Nobody moved to help. Nobody dared. That's when a voice cut through the tension like a blade. "That's enough." Everyone turned toward the voice. Standing at the edge of the construction site was a man in a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, his athletic build evident even in casual clothes. His jaw was set, his eyes focused with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. Jason Statham had been driving past when he'd witnessed the entire incident through the chain-link fence. Something about the casual cruelty of what he'd just seen made him pull over and walk onto the site. Castellano turned, irritation flashing across his features as he sized up the newcomer. "Who the hell are you? This is private property. Get lost before I call security." He waved his hand dismissively, already turning back to continue berating Marco, who was still on the ground, wiping blood from his mouth. The foreman stood frozen, uncertain how to handle the situation spiraling out of control before him. Jason walked forward with measured steps, his presence commanding attention without effort. "I'm someone who doesn't walk away when I see a man abuse someone who can't fight back." His British accent was calm but carried an edge that made several workers instinctively step back. He'd spent years performing his own stunts, fighting professionally trained martial artists, and learning real combat skills. He knew how to read dangerous situations. Castellano's face flushed darker. "You don't know who you're dealing with. I own half the city. I could make your life very difficult." He pulled out his phone, presumably to call someone who would make this problem disappear. Wealthy men like him were used to buying their way out of consequences, surrounding themselves with lawyers and hired muscle who ensured they never face accountability for their actions. Jason stopped 3 feet away, his stance relaxed but ready. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A bully who thinks money gives him the right to treat people like garbage." He glanced at Marco, who was being helped to his feet by a co-worker. "You're going to apologize to that man, and then you're going to write him a check for damages." Castellano laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Or what?" The tension on the construction site was electric. Workers had formed a loose circle around the confrontation, their tools forgotten in their hands as they watched the standoff unfold. Some recognized Jason from movies, whispering to each other in disbelief. Others simply saw a stranger willing to do what none of them dared. Marco stood on shaky legs, his co-worker supporting his elbow, his eyes wide with fear about what might happen next. Castellano stepped closer to Jason, invading his personal space in an obvious attempt at intimidation. "Or what?" he repeated, his voice dripping with challenge. "You going to hit me? Please do. My lawyers will own everything you have by tomorrow morning. I'll make sure you never work again in this town or anywhere else." His confidence was absolute, built on years of watching people back down when faced with his wealth and connections. Jason didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't even blink. "I'm not going to hit you. I don't need to. His voice remained level, controlled. "But I am going to make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are. See those phones?" He gestured to several workers who had their smartphones out, recording the entire encounter. "This is going viral. Your business partners, your investors, your country club friends, they're all going to see you slap a working man for getting mud on your shoes." The color drained from Castellano's face as he realized the implications. In today's world, a video like this could destroy a reputation overnight. Social media didn't care about lawyers or money. Public opinion was its own courtroom, and the verdict was swift and merciless. He glanced around, seeing the phones pointed at him like accusatory fingers, capturing every word and expression. "You're bluffing," Castellano said, but his voice wavered. "Delete those videos right now," he shouted at the workers, but none of them moved. They'd lived under his thumb for too long, enduring his insults and impossible demands. This moment felt like justice, and they weren't about to let it slip away. Jason crossed his arms. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize sincerely. Not some half-hearted sorry that means nothing. Then you're going to compensate Marco for assault and humiliation." Castellano's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his entire body radiating barely controlled rage. He was a man unaccustomed to being challenged, much less humiliated in front of common laborers. His mind raced through options, calculating whether his usual tactics would work here. The phones recording him were poison, but backing down felt like death to his ego. He'd built his empire on being the most ruthless man in the room. "You think you're some kind of hero." Castellano spat, turning his fury toward Jason. "You're just another actor playing pretend. This is the real world, where money and power matter. Your little movies mean nothing here." His voice rose with each word, desperation bleeding through the bravado. "These people are nothing. They're replaceable. Tomorrow there will be 50 more just like him begging for this job." Marco flinched at the words, but Jason's expression hardened into something dangerous. He'd faced actual fighters, survived brutal training, and performed stunts that could have killed him. He understood the difference between fictional violence and real consequence. What he saw in Castellano was something worse than any movie villain, a real person who genuinely believed other human beings were worthless based solely on their bank accounts. "That's where you're wrong," Jason said quietly, and somehow his lowered voice was more threatening than shouting. "Every person here has value. That man you hit, he's probably working himself to exhaustion to provide for his family. He has more integrity in his calloused hands than you've got in your entire body." He took one step forward, and Castellano instinctively stepped back. "And right now, you have exactly 30 seconds to apologize before I personally ensure this video reaches every news outlet in the country." The silence that followed was deafening. Castellano looked around at the circle of faces staring at him, seeing not fear anymore but something else, contempt mixed with hope. These men who had suffered his abuse were watching to see if accountability could actually touch someone like him. The moment stretched, heavy with possibility and consequence. His phone buzzed with an incoming call, probably his assistant wondering why he was late for his next appointment. Finally, his shoulders sagged slightly. Pride warred with pragmatism, and pragmatism won. Castellano turned toward Marco, his jaw working as if the words were physically painful to produce. I apologize for striking you. It was inappropriate and wrong." The words came out stiff and mechanical, but they were words nonetheless. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook, his hands trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. He scrawled something quickly and tore the check free, thrusting it toward Marco. "For your trouble." Marco took the check with shaking hands, his eyes widening when he saw the amount, $25,000. It was more money than he'd see in a year of back-breaking labor, enough to cover his daughter's medical bills and then some. Tears welled in his eyes, not from the earlier pain but from overwhelming relief. He looked at Jason, words failing him, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't express. Jason gave him a small nod, then turned back to Castellano. "One more thing. You're going to improve conditions on this site. Better safety equipment, fair wages, and you'll treat these men with the respect they deserve. Because if I hear you've gone back to your old ways, those videos will still be waiting." His tone left no room for argument, and Castellano nodded curtly before practically fleeing to his Mercedes, gravel spraying as he sped away. The construction site erupted in cheers and applause. Workers crowded around Jason, shaking his hand, thanking him, some with tears streaming down their weathered faces. These were men who'd spent their lives being invisible, their labor taken for granted, their dignity trampled. Seeing someone stand up for one of their own had struck something deep and powerful. Marco pushed through the crowd, still clutching the check, and embraced Jason wordlessly. "You didn't have to do this," Marco finally managed, his voice thick. "Thank you. You saved my family." Jason clasped his shoulder firmly. Everyone deserves respect, regardless of who signs their paycheck. Don't let anyone tell you different. As he walked back to his car, Jason felt something settle in his chest, a reminder that real heroism wasn't choreographed fight scenes or explosive stunts. Sometimes it was simply refusing to look away when someone needed help. Behind him, Marco stared at the check that would change his life, while his co-workers returned to work with renewed dignity, knowing that today, justice had actually prevailed.